Dealers, need more used cars fast? With Kelly Blue Book Instant Cash Offer, you can connect directly with local sellers to win more inventory, improve look to book, and lower cost to market. That's the instant advantage. Request a demo today at b2b.kbb.com/ICO.
Welcome to Daily Drive for Tuesday, June 2nd, 2026. I'm Kellen Walker in Las Vegas. Today on the show, the new vehicle market may finally be turning a corner. BYD has its eye on a storied Italian luxury brand, but the owner says it's not for sale. And Waymo hits some rough patches this spring, flooding, a construction zone scare, and some rattled riders. Plus, we cap off our 3-week series on the state of auto trade with a panel of industry experts on what a renegotiated USMCA could actually mean for North American production.
I think the U.S., notwithstanding the fact that they say that Canada and Mexico don't matter to them from a trade perspective, it absolutely matters.
Let's run through all the news you need to know to keep up in the auto industry. Finally, some good news for the new vehicle market. May could deliver the first monthly sales gain of 2026. According to J.D. Power Global Data and Cox Automotive, deliveries could rise nearly 2% when final numbers come in. Hyundai and Kia bounced back from 2 tough months, with hybrid sales leading the way. Hyundai's overall U.S. deliveries rose 3.5%. Kia's climbed nearly 2%, as retail demand held steady despite affordability pressures. Hyundai hybrid sales surged 90%. Kia's jumped 179%. Meanwhile, Mazda snapped a 9-month losing streak, with May volume up 35%. BYD is eyeing European luxury brands, including Maserati. The Chinese automaker is in talks to acquire idle manufacturing capacity from legacy automakers to sidestep EU tariffs. According to Bloomberg, BYD Executive Vice President Stella Lee called brands like Maserati, quote, very interesting. But Maserati's chief operating officer says the brand is not for sale, and analysts are skeptical any deal materializes. Automotive analyst Ferdinand Dudenhofer tells Automotive News Europe the idea makes little sense, economically, especially after BYD's first quarter net profit tumbled more than 55%. And Waymo has been hitting some spring turbulence. Flooding and a construction zone scare prompted the robotaxi company to suspend highway and regional service across multiple cities. But it hasn't slowed the company down. Waymo remains the only U.S. robotaxi operator offering rides at commercial scale. Here to talk more about it is tech and innovation reporter Molly Boygon, one of the co-hosts of the Automotive News Shift podcast. Molly, welcome back to Daily Drive.
Thanks for having me, Kel.
All right, Molly, so you talked to a rider who was shaken by his experience in a Waymo construction zone incident. What happened?
Yes, I spoke to Elliot Slade, who's a 31-year-old communications professional. He was riding home from an event with his fiance in a Waymo, and they went on the highway. And to his telling, the vehicle basically began to swerve around some traffic that was caused by the presence of a construction zone. And ultimately, the Waymo went into the construction lane, picked up speed, and got chased by the cops. So it sounded like a pretty harrowing experience.
Wow, that sounds like a Netflix series. Now, how does the company balance that kind of public fear and what it claims is a strong overall safety record?
Waymo has published data about its safety record, and the company says that over 170 million autonomous miles, it's seen 13 times fewer what it calls serious injury causing collisions than human drivers in the cities where Waymo is operating. So even though, you hear about these edge cases and challenging experiences for drivers, the company defends its safety record. Then you have critics who say, well, while 170 million autonomously driven miles sounds like a lot, compared to human drivers, it's really not that much. So the concern is that as these Waymo robotaxis and other robotaxi companies scale, these edge cases, which proportionally are few relative to the overall number of autonomously driven miles, will increase in frequency. That's the concern.
Interesting. Now, what does the competitive landscape look like right now? And does anyone have a realistic shot at catching Waymo?
I spoke to an analyst for this story who said that Waymo is the leader in level 4 driver-free autonomy, period. No other robotaxi company is really close to what Waymo is doing right now, which is paid, bookable, fully autonomous rides at scale. There are some other players in the space who are working on catching up with Waymo, Zoox, Motional, and Tesla. But at this point, really, Waymo is the leader, and Waymo is continuing its expansion. So the way that the experts that I spoke to sort of categorize that is by saying, despite some of the safety issues that Waymo has had, the company is really picking up momentum and doesn't appear to be stopped by any of these concerns.
Perfect. Molly, thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
Coming up, a panel of trade experts breaks down what a renegotiated USMCA could mean for North American auto production. That's next on Daily Drive.
Dealers, need more used cars fast? You're not alone. And waiting for inventory to show up isn't much of a strategy. That's where Kelley Blue Book Instant Cash Offer comes in. Backed by Kelley Blue Book's 100 years of trusted valuation expertise, Instant Cash Offer connects you directly with local sellers so you can win more inventory right when you need it. And because the experience is transparent and consistent from the first click, it helps build trust early, before a customer ever walks through your doors. That trust matters. It sets expectations up front, reducing friction in the appraisal process. What that means for your team is more control over how inventory comes onto your lot and more time focused on selling cars, not chasing them. It's a smarter way to source inventory in today's competitive market, and that's the instant advantage. If you're ready to connect with local sellers, win more inventory opportunities, and lower cost to market with an approach dealers rely on, check out Kelley Blue Book Instant Cash Offer. Request a demo today at b2b.kbb.com/ICO.
Welcome back to Daily Drive. I'm Kellen Walker. On Monday, we at Automotive News wrapped up our 3-week series on the state of auto trade with a look at the full picture. On the latest Congress Conversations live stream, we brought together a panel of industry experts to dig into the USMCA review from all sides. That panel included Colin Shaw, president of MEMA Original Equipment Suppliers, David Gans, Will Clayton Fellow in Trade and International Economics at the Baker Institute, and Linda Hassenfratz, executive chair of the board at Linamar. Our own Hannah Lutz, assistant managing editor of content, led the conversation alongside Greg Layson, digital editor at Automotive News Canada. Here's a piece of that conversation.
So I wanted to start with some recent news. We're just 1 month away from the July USMCA review, and there seems to be a constant chatter about it and chatter around it. On Friday, there were reports that the Trump administration demanded Mexico to raise the level of the regional content in North American-built cars and trucks to 82% to qualify for the preferential trade deal, with 50% of that value produced in the United States. David, can you put that into perspective for us? How likely is that scenario, and what would the trade impact be?
Well, certainly it's an opening position, and it's almost identical to the opening position of the Trump administration in the efforts to renegotiate NAFTA to produce the USMCA in 2018. So we don't really know, of course, the extent to which Mexico will accept this as proposed or will seek additional changes. I think if it becomes the law modifying the USMCA, which may well not happen this year, the impact on Mexico is probably less than the impact on Canada, assuming Canada is told that it must take the same rules. At present, autos and SUVs must have 40% of their content made in factories that pay at least $16 an hour, which essentially means Canada and the U.S., but not Mexico. It's 45% for small trucks. So if you raise the U.S. content from 40 or 45% to Mexico, in Mexico, it isn't as big a shift as it would be to say to Canada, well, you have to use what could be a much, much higher percentage just because the $16 rule doesn't really affect them. So I would guess that if this happens, and I think it's a very large if, part of it, of course, depends on what the U.S. tariff would be. Under USMCA, U.S. compliant vehicles should enter the U.S. duty free. Today, under Mr. Trump's unilateral mechanism, there's a 25% tariff on such vehicles with a credit for U.S. content. So a 50% content Mexican vehicle would pay a net tariff of 12.5%. There's one, of course, can hope that Mexico can negotiate a lower rate than that, but I think that's all still very much up in the air. And obviously, it's all going to be affected by the 50% tariffs on steel and aluminum and copper.
Okay. And Linda, David just talked about how that would be a big shift for Canada in particular. Do you have the same read on that, or how would Canadian companies approach that style of agreement?
Yeah, I actually wouldn't say that it would be as much a much more significant change for Canadian automakers, because a good chunk of content in Canada-built vehicles comes from the U.S. I mean, for instance, a lot of the engines and transmissions are coming from the U.S., and that is a big percentage of content. So I would not think that it would have as significant an impact as David is suggesting. Of course, we have to look vehicle by vehicle and see what the impact would be. Of course, there would be changes, but I think that, we would manage through it. And frankly, I think that the sooner we come to an agreement, the better, for a whole variety of reasons. So, I'm anxious to see the agreement get done as soon as possible. So, I think we need to look vehicle by vehicle, but I think that it's doable and we can get there.
Colin, what's your perspective from the U.S. supply base? How are they thinking through this, or have they had a chance to, since there's so much movement, it seems, every day?
Yeah, there is a lot of movement. I think the devil's in the details here, because when you look at going up to 82%, you also have to look at what are the pieces in the component pieces. So you have the core, principal, and complementary. So it also depends on movement within those categories, because movement in there, if electronics were to move, and a lot of electronics are produced overseas, that could be very different than simply keeping everything where it is and increasing that regional value content. So I think before, we get a lot of reactions, because the supply base is so complex in automotive, and it does include nearly every supply chain in existence, whether it's chemicals, metal, upholstery, electronics. We need to really understand what are the ins and outs of those. I think at a very high and basic level, 80% might be doable. And again, this is just for the pass car market. The commercial truck market is still in an implementation phase, but we just have to really understand what are the details of those detailed component categories before we really understand what the impact is going to be to the entire region, let alone country by country.
Linda, I think, Donald Trump's administration negotiating team is trying to bring jobs back to America, to get more people working in America. And whether those jobs come from Canada or Mexico is yet to be determined. But when we're talking about these new content rules, obviously Canada would like more automaking, more supply chain activity. But in the end, given the stakes and what's going on and how things have been negotiated, is sort of status quo considered a win for Canada? If Donald Trump goes to Mexico and makes these changes, and Mexico has to sort of capitulate and sort of lose some jobs and make some changes, but Canada stays the same, as you mentioned, it might not affect us as much. Is that a win for the Canadian auto industry?
Look, I think it's a win that we get a deal over the line so that we can resume tariff-free trade of vehicles. I mean, from a parts perspective, as I think everybody knows, the parts are not being tariffed. I mean, we have no tariffs on any of our product coming from either Canada or Mexico. So this is an assembled vehicle issue. And for Linamar, for our Canadian plants, because we have quite a few American plants as well, by the way, almost the same number as in Canada. But for the parts we're shipping into into the U.S., I mean, we're not seeing any tariff impact. So from a supplier perspective, I think it's like the perspective is different. I'll also point out that our product that's shipping into the U.S., well, I guess by definition is going into transmission, engine, or vehicle assembly plants there. So for Linamar's own situation, we don't have a huge amount of supply to the Canadian vehicle assemblers. We have some, but I know for other suppliers, they're more reliant on the vehicles being built in Canada. So I think that depends on the company and depends on the vehicle. But I mean, to me, let's get a deal across the line. If we have to give up something on a U.S. content as is being proposed, I think we can figure that out. Honestly, there's already quite a lot of U.S. content in a lot of vehicles. It's just the nature of the industry and how it slices and dices. And I think the key part is keeping things tariff-free floating across those borders because, as everyone knows, there's a lot of crossings happening there. I mean, I've got examples in our own company where the same component in various forms is crossing a border 6 times before it pulls into somebody's driveway. So, I think it's critical to maintain that tariff-free status for the parts. But I also think it's really important that we maintain tariff-free status for vehicles in each country as well. So the sooner that we can get that done, I think the better.
So speaking of that, when do you think we should expect an outcome on the USMCA? And anyone can jump on this. Linda, what's your expectation?
It's not going to happen by July 1st. That's for sure.
When it officially starts, right? I know informal negotiations are ongoing and formally they start July 1st. So what is a realistic timeline, do you think?
I think by the end of the year, in my opinion, we should have a resolution. I think everybody's pretty motivated at this point to have this discussion and get things settled. The U.S. has enough issues around the world that they're dealing with, both trade and non-trade related, that this is one less thing to worry about is maintenance of a critical free trade agreement within our continent that is responsible for millions of U.S. jobs. I think the U.S., notwithstanding the fact that they say that Canada and Mexico don't matter to them from a trade perspective, it absolutely matters. I mean, the trade relations are extremely deep. Canada, as an example, is a number one customer for, I think, 36 U.S. states. Like, Canada matters a lot to those states and therefore to the United States and as I say, millions of jobs that are related in all industries. So we all have a lot at stake to try to come to an agreement and, make the changes that we need to make, everybody as happy as possible. So I think all parties are motivated to try and get things done as soon as we can.
You can find our full 3-week package of stories on the state of trade in North America at autonews.com. That's Daily Drive for today. I'm Kellen Walker. Thanks to Automotive News executive producer Jake Neer, as well as our own Molly Boygon and David Phillips. We also have reporting from Lois Jones of our sibling publication, Automotive News Europe. You can get the latest news on USMCA trade negotiations, Waymo and the robotaxi race, and everything happening in the auto industry at autonews.com. Come back tomorrow for a conversation with Daniel Gover of Beaver Toyota in Georgia, who's developing a free white paper for dealerships to help counter AI-generated customer advice.
Ultimately, we said, is it fair to think that the 2 models did not consider these items? And do you think, in your own mind, do you think you would agree that chat didn't value these things and it's certainly worth the small difference figure that we're at? She did agree. She did buy the car.
We'd love to hear from you. Let us know what you think of the show and the topics we covered today. Send us an email at dailydrive@autonews.com or leave us a voicemail at 313-444-2774. And if you enjoyed the podcast, remember to like, leave a review, and subscribe so you never miss an episode.